Hello and welcome to the Brand Hunch podcast, where we explore ideas and hunches around how marketers are growing great brands. It's a look under the hood at how much is marketing science and how much is built on a hunch. Today my guest is Amy Kingon Smith, Marketing Director at Revlon Australia and New Zealand. Amy's been with the business for over 10 years and before this was in brand teams at Kimberly-Clark and Lion. Amy's responsible for the growth of the Revlon Australian and New Zealand business across Revlon Colour Cosmetics, Beauty Tools, Hair Colour, Cutex and Mitchum Deodorant. She leads strategic marketing and is deeply commercial, involved in local innovation and product development, along with the usual creative production, media, PR and retail marketing. I completely butchered that last line. Welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having me, Lindsay.
So take me back to the beginning. How did you start out in marketing?
Well, I was at university and I guess always was always attracted to business and business studies in school, but loved the creative side as well. For those old enough to remember the subject design technology, if it still exists, almost the fusion of those two worlds. And I was lucky enough to have an accounting co-op degree where I got accepted into this program, and it really threw me into internships. And I knew, I'm very grateful for that opportunity. But accounting was certainly not my path as a profession, but was incredibly grateful for the grounding in commercial and financial acumen that's essential to thrive in a career in business, or at least understand and take each building block and wanting to constantly eschew the stereotype that affords a lot of, or if not many, marketers around, picking the colour for the brochures. So being able to demonstrate that you can do more. So lucky enough to work with Kimberly-Clark, which were a sponsor of that particular degree, and started in their marketing graduate program where they rotate you around everything from field sales. I think I was given a car key to a Ford Falcon day one of the marketing graduate program, and I'm not sure if they still do that anymore because, there was a lot of trust on a 21-year-old driving and calling on pharmacies, right through to spending time in sales category. And of course, couldn't wait to get into the brand teams after doing all those rotations. And from there, really built on brand management.
I was going to say, so you knew that brand was a standout sort of in those early days. It was different for you?
I did. I was always attracted to companies that had a tangible product and a connection to a consumer.
What do you think has been the red thread throughout your career? So Kimberly-Clark, and then you're over at Lion, and then now at Revlon. What has been the sort of the constant for you that you keep coming back to?
I think the fusion of creativity for a commercial outcome, which I guess is innovation really. So not necessarily always in the strict definition of the word, but applying problem solving. And there's many ways to do that. And I think creativity is what gives me energy, and commerciality is what keeps me in a job.
Thinking back to those early graduate days, being in sort of brand management or brand manager roles through to marketing teams of today, what do you think have been some of the biggest changes you've seen?
I think just the climate that we're operating in. So the amount of change when it was pretty simple, you'd have 2 or 3 launches a year. The media landscape wasn't nearly as fragmented. Social media wasn't so much of a thing. So it's more challenging to connect with consumers in a meaningful way. And the world as well has changed significantly. I really do think there's this pre and post-COVID era and all the geographical things that have gone on around it that have really changed how society operates today, or even values and beliefs. And most of all, actually, for the positive.
Throughout your career, you've been at organisations with large legacies. Kimberly-Clark's, I think, 152 years old, Lion's sort of just over 100, and Revlon's a youthful 92, I believe. What do you think it is about legacy that attracts you?
I think it's being able to celebrate this brand that's been able to reinvent whilst standing the test of time. So there's something really powerful in these big brands, but they wouldn't have stayed around as long if they hadn't reinvented and had to constantly reevaluate and innovate. And I feel it's very lucky when you get to work on some of these brands for all the people before you that have contributed to what the brand is today.
You mentioned working in innovation before, and I think at Lion you're quite involved in innovation and subsequently. Tell me about what innovation means to you and its relationship to marketing.
It really is about checking in with the consumer inside and making sure that the product or service offering or whatever your unique selling proposition, even if it's in comms, relates to the consumer today. And if it doesn't, innovation is really a platform to communicate your brand better and make sure that your brand is actually fulfilling that need.
Tell me about a few innovation projects that you've worked on over the years.
So one I loved at Lion, I think my title at the time was called Innovation Wine, Innovation Manager Wine. And
Not a bad
Not a
title.
bad title. And it was really the beginning of when, wellness was kicking off in a big way. It certainly wasn't to the extent it is today, but it was really around, there was those low murmurs of moderation really becoming mainstream, but it was more around the post proliferation of wine bars and the change in licensing laws. And really for people that are wanting to try new wines in moderation or experience new varietals or types of wine, there was a lot of barrier to trial. So yes, there were small packs, there were casks, there were little tins, but there was nothing that really addressed that deep core insight of exploration, because grounded in consumer insight is that it still is a pleasurable category. It's a reward. It's meant to bring joy. It's not necessarily to feel like a restriction. So we went about and did all these consumer groups and in-field testing and discussions and expert opinion, and designed these bottles, which are basically a 3-stacked bottle that actually looked like a wine bottle still. Because talking about legacy and convention, once you change the format of the traditional wine bottle, consumers thought that it was cheap, it wasn't high quality, and it didn't have that same experience when being consumed. So it was almost like, these are the dimensions you've got to keep the same. You've got to keep the shape of the wine bottle, which has existed for, goodness me, probably centuries and centuries. But finding a glass manufacturer that could almost have these stacked wine bottles, one on top of another, and you could have a different varietal in each. So it was basically the modern wine flight, which you're used to getting in certain restaurants or wineries, I guess, being able to do that in your own home.
And do you think having parameters, you just mentioned around the context in which you're innovating within, and having parameters, do you think that breeds more creative thinking, or do you think it just makes it more difficult? I know Tris, our ECD at Cello, he talks about parameters actually making creatives more creative because you've sort of got to colour between the lines. What are your thoughts on that?
I completely agree. I think if you've got too much choice, you don't know where to begin. Whereas if you go, right, these are my parameters, these are the guys, how can I mix the recipe, in between those two points.
And so building on that, how do you know for a legacy brand when to innovate versus when innovation is going to cause more harm than good?
I think there's certain products which are core of your business, worth a significant amount of sales, loyal consumers, been around for decades. Innovate those particular products with extreme caution and care, because it can have, if you don't get it right, a disastrous effect. So it's a real balance as well when you've got a legacy or core consumer whilst trying to bring on a new consumer as well at the same time.
I've seen it even from a packaging perspective with legacy brands when, I forget, but there's some really famous case studies, I think some sort of almond milk and a few, where product packaging was changed too much for a loyal consumer base, and it has catastrophic effects for sales.
Absolutely. Even just, I look back to Kimberly Clark working in on You by Kotex, and every year it was, at the time the buyers used to call it the fashion overhaul of the category, when you change the design to be contemporary, but again it still had to have those key elements and guardrails so that you didn't push it too far to be A, unrecognisable, or B, not resonate and lose that loyal consumer.
It's almost like unsexy for, to talk about consistency and, core brand assets in a world of kind of fast-paced change. But from a brand perspective, we see all the time that's where, values created and built over time is the resonance and consistency done in the right way.
Oh, completely. And that's a really topical thing, even just thinking about our in-store displays at the moment and our comms. It's really tempting, particularly in beauty, to get caught up in those trends and make sure that you're refreshing and being seen as in the now. And there's times where you go, well, we pushed that too far, we've got to bring it back. So absolutely.
When you think about the 3 companies you've worked with, what has been one lesson you've learnt at each?
I think at Kimberly Clark it really was the foundation. It's a well-renowned FMCG with strong structure, processes, tools, support systems, even just the resourcing and the way that all the teams were structured. So I really didn't appreciate that, I don't think, until later in my career, because at the time it really was my first proper job since university. But I've definitely drawn back on those lessons and fundamentals. Then I think at Lion it was about being able to apply the theory and feel that confidence that I could switch between different industries and different consumers, different products. So being able to apply the theory in a new way, but also given a little bit more freedom. And I think that's where, particularly working with some of the wineries or the wine brands that were built on a consumer insight, they were much more innovative and probably had less restrictions than these, brands like Huggies, Kleenex. So that was really exciting, being able to, I think, fuel that sense of innovation, which then led to the innovation wine role, to really start to reinvent and be more involved from the ground up. And then at Revlon, I just think it's transformation. Every year's different, every season's different. The market moves so quickly, consumers move so quickly, that it's really taught me, I think, to adapt. And I think it was a privileged position to have 6 months of planning time in the days of Kimberly-Clark, whereas with Revlon it's much more fast-paced, agile, making decisions, changing, being okay to go back on decisions, making decisions really quickly. They would be the three in summary.
And I assume that they're embedded by leadership, the sort of iterative working, and how is that fostered by the business itself?
Yeah, look, I think it's a double-edged sword, and I think there needs to be. We're often wrestling with what's the right cadence of planning, and we have those key moments, which we do keep the cycle similar because we need to for business rhythms. But it's constantly, I think, reevaluating what that scope is, dependent on the project, dependent on the situation. So absolutely endorsed by leadership to go out and make a difference, and things happen, which certainly makes it a great place to work.
So talking about Revlon, it's obviously a legacy brand with enormous heritage. Tell me a bit about the story and the background, headquarters, and how Australia relates to global.
So originally, as you said, 92 years young, originated from New York, based on two founders, and really their history was grounded, or strength was grounded in nail and lip. So in terms of that colour cosmetics, and was almost seen as a beacon for being bold and bold glamour, and quite a statement for women at the time. So fast forward a few years, Charlie was a Revlon fragrance, and depicted in the communication was the first, I think, female to wear pants, at the time in those comms. So it's had a history of leading innovation, being at the forefront of championing women, and celebrating joyfully all the things that beauty can bring. So it's obviously gone around the world, really strong, particularly in Latin America, South Africa, Australia, so outside of the US. And I think the strength that Australia has is the ability to be in such a wide array of distribution channels. So not just a pharmacy brand, even though pharmacy is incredibly important and the key driver, we're able to appear in department store as well as grocery. So I think that's something that's quite unique to our market.
So on that note, you've obviously got a sales team in pharmacies and in retail environments that are not necessarily, and probably rarely, Revlon employees. How do you manage from a brand perspective people selling your products when you may not have ever met them or trained them? How are they endorsing the brand?
So there's a real mix. There's a real mix of, we have our own field team, as well as a lot of beauty advisors that we rely heavily on, and work really closely with our retail partners such as Chemist Warehouse and Priceline, Maya, on training them. So you're absolutely right. It's not like the Mecca and Sephora, or even a brand which has its own direct store where you're able to influence that beauty advisor directly.
It's interesting from a brand perspective, if you think of, or if you identify brand or branding as being, the sum of perceptions a consumer has about, product or service, that the salespeople they might be interacting with may not be Revlon employees, which I guess is outside of your control. Obviously, you can provide training and support, but ultimately also need the products themselves and the in-store displays to do a lot of the lifting for you. How do you think about that broadly?
I think it's actually a really important part of what we do, and a bit like what you were saying around maybe the less sexy part, being consistent, doing the basics, but how we look in store, our visual merchandising, how we present ourselves to all buyers, and all of our training sessions where we have it's the responsibility of the marketing team as well as the sales team. We share that because there's so many trainings to attend. Ensuring our materials are really insightful and are engaging and inspiring, because they need to do, as you say, a lot of the heavy lifting when it's not as simple as being able to speak to everyone in a town hall context. So I think, you think about the touch points of a beauty product, it really is, my friend told me to buy it, or someone in store told me to buy it, or I was by a display, for promotion, etc. And then all the other elements of the marketing mix come in.
You mentioned before that sort of global core brand pillars around bold and joy. How much of those remain today? Are there sort of values or brand pillars that globally the organisation lives by? And have you adapted any of those locally, or are they completely different here?
Well, our tagline, as you see on our logo, is Live Boldly. And that's been around for a number of years now, I would say 7 or 8. And that really was intended just to absolutely reiterate that one one value around the globe, to bring, and more broadly, not just, Revlon obviously has a lot of other brands within the portfolio as well, that as a company, bringing joy through beauty innovations every day. So the thing that I love about working on big brands is actually you do have the ability to impact or connect with a lot of different consumers and make it really accessible. I've also worked on luxury brands for a while, and whilst it was lovely and a lovely time to dig into some of the nuances that the luxury market affords, I didn't find it quite as gratifying because it's much smaller and it's not as accessible. So being able to make beauty accessible to everyday women all around the globe, not only through our price point but distribution, is something which definitely is a value around the globe. And then if we think about the Live Boldly, more of the brand side, I think what we have been able to do locally is adapt that global pillar into locally relevant campaigns, initiatives to bring it to life. Because really, what does Live Boldly mean? And how do you demonstrate that through your activations and communications in market?
You've been at Revlon for over 10 years. You've sort of been promoted from brand manager role to head of marketing, now marketing director across Australia and New Zealand. How has your remit changed, or at what did you learn at each stage?
I think when I first started and I was really learning the category as such. So coming in from wine, as a senior brand manager, I think I had one direct report, so officially managing someone for the first time and really having to learn the ways of working as well as all of the different products. I think the portfolio is like over 500 products, and then being able to prioritize, what is most important, what is actually my job. Like there was just so much that could be done. And that was really where I learnt also just the foundations of how the business was run, because you're much more in the execution. And we were much smaller at that time as well. So the team has grown, the business has grown, and so has the number of people. So having that, I find that's something which I'm grateful for, because sometimes when you go in at a higher level, it's harder to learn the implications of some decisions if you haven't gone through the ranks as such. So I rotated across different segments for a while, the eye category, the face category, the lip category, and my team grew, and then into marketing manager and head of marketing. So marketing manager was more holistic around the communications, managing agencies. Head of marketing was also looking at the other brands within the portfolio. So that was also expanding in, just from colour cosmetics into hair and colour, deodorant, nail care. And now as in marketing director, it's much more of, I guess, running a business, looking at the P&L. So whilst being commercially aware and astute has been a thread throughout my time at Revlon, purely because there's so many launches, ROI is a huge focus. P&Ls for launches, incredibly important, but not holistic. So now I'm looking at the business, running the P&L, and also in a leadership capacity as well.
When you think about global brand and then acting locally, how much change can you affect versus direction you're given?
Again, that's been a wonderful journey where I think in all companies, they go through phases of almost a centralised, decentralised approach, centralised. And because Australia is a really important market, and through, great support from the global teams and working in partnership, we have been able to spearhead and lead a lot of local initiatives, right from the ambassador that we have, the innovation that we launch, the innovation that we create, the communications that we go to market. So that is something almost each year there's been a different focus, and I think there's been a real appetite to understand local market needs, provided that you can showcase a good argument as to why it doesn't work. And on face value, the US Australia beauty markets are not that different, but when you dig deeper more into the way the brands are perceived and the consumers in our market, there is a difference. It's certainly important to make sure that you are adapting it locally.
You mentioned the role of ambassadors. Who are some of the ambassadors that the brand has had, and who have you currently got? What's your interrelationship with ambassadors?
So thinking about the history, and I think you asked me before around the history of the brand, I think Revlon was one of the first to use the supermodels of the time. So thinking of the Cindy Crawfords, and being one of the first to really champion the brand ambassador. That's, of course, developed and shaped over time. We've had Gwen Stefani, we've had Emma Stone, and currently our local ambassadors are Ashley Graham and Madeline Klein. So you'll see, over time, there was also a period where a lot more digital influencer-focused ambassadors, Netflix actors, people with really strong followers online to embody those live boldly values. But what we found at the time when we brought on a local brand ambassador was that the global ambassadors were going in a bit of a different direction in terms of the brand values and how Revlon showed up within the US market. So that did not resonate in Australia. So we were able to do some research. And by that, we didn't have huge research budgets. I mean, quick dips on resonance, awareness, fit for Revlon. 3 questions on the 5 at the time. And then compare that to 5 potential ambassadors that we were looking at for our market. And that's how we were able to really demonstrate the case for a local ambassador. And we have Delta Goodrem, who has been, partner with the brand now for 3 years.
And what does success look like with an ambassador? What is it that you're looking for, and how do you know that they sort of embody the Revlon DNA?
Well, first of all, they have to have some shared values. So I think if you look at the Revlon brand and Delta, they've both got longevity, reinvention. They're quite classic in terms of their brand appeal. They're able to span multiple ages and age brackets. We are a mass brand and we celebrate that. We're mainstream, and that was a really important element of selecting a brand ambassador. But also just thinking a little bit more broadly around, actually, it's not even that broad. Thinking more specifically around an Australian consumer. And there was a time when we didn't necessarily have the global faces from the head office. So expecting a consumer to resonate with someone which might have a really strong online following or street cred, if you will, in New York, might not appeal to Middle Australia. So Australians and consumers in general are pretty parochial. And I really noticed this even more so post-COVID. Consumers really want to be able to go into store, look at someone and go, is that for me? Yes or no? Do I recognize that person? Yes. So it's really as simple as that. And that was really what drove the idea to have a local ambassador, not to mention being able to be a little bit more in control of our own timelines, because we've got this, opportunity to have these beautiful merchandising units in store on our walls. The lead times in doing shoots and making sure we've got all the imagery, etc. on time. Being able to do that locally was a win, to be more agile and not be trying to make something up at the last minute, because if the timelines didn't work for everybody around the globe.
What does your agency village model look like? Do you in-house? Do you out-house? Have you shifted over time? Do you look to experts for different components of your brand work? How do you think about it?
We've definitely shifted over time. So, there has been some that's been more internal. For example, PR. We used to have an internal PR manager, but we've now outsourced that to an agency. And over time, we've built, great agency partners through media, creative comms, and PR to really support our ongoing planning and execution in market. And I think leveraging external agencies really does make sure that you're being challenged, you're staying ahead of, you're staying up to date with what's happening in the market. You're not being closed-minded, particularly if you've been, working on a brand for a long time. The very nature of agencies, you hope you have some consistency and, fantastic either owners of the agencies if they're small, or account leads that have been there for a long time. But they do bring with them, a lot of new blood as agency turns over and looks at your brand with fresh eyes, which is really important.
Thinking back over the 10 years of your time at Revlon, do you have any standout moments?
There's probably a couple. The first one would be around a purpose-led campaign, and the second is to do with our local innovation. The first one was our foray really into a consumer-led, purpose-led campaign. And at the time we were launching a new lipstick. It was actually called Bold Mattes, because the finish was a matte lipstick within the Super Lustrous range. And we were talking in the office, what are we going to do for this campaign? There were really limited assets, not a lot of budget behind it. And at the time, there was so much noise and media around this terrible drought that was going on in Australia. and had been one of the worst for over 100 years. And we were thinking, here we are selling a lipstick and all these poor people are in terrible drought-stricken conditions. And we came up with a working name. It was Bold Mats. It developed into Bold Matters. So being bold matters as an expression of live boldly. And put forward a case to be able to create this local campaign. The local campaign featured 3 incredible women. They were everyday, ordinary women doing extraordinary things in central West Queensland. One was a vet and a mum of 3 and ran a property. Another one was, a finance manager and a pilot who was running a property the size of Tasmania by herself. And the other one was a photographer who had actually gone around Australia on her own accord to raise money and awareness about drought and to lobby the government to do more in these drought-stricken areas. So what Revlon was able to do, we put forward this case of let's do this campaign, but the resonance to Revlon. We featured these 3 extraordinary women by telling their stories, and at the same time we're able to raise money for Drought Angels, also a charity run by these really incredible women, through a donation of $2 for every super lustrous lipstick sold. So by doing this, we're able to show, the relevance of Live Boldly and what that actually meant by doing good in the community and casting a light on this issue that was affecting Australians. So an example of a global brand being able to act locally for the greater good.
Incredible. What a great story. In terms of leadership, how do you lead? How do you get the best out of your team? And what do you look for when you're hiring?
I think it's all about attitude. I know a lot of managers would say that, but I think skill and experience is important, but it really is around attitude and an aptitude to problem solve. Because I like to give my team as much autonomy in a supportive environment so that they can find their way, they can learn and develop. They feel supported, but they don't feel overburdened by every minute being watched or having to report back. And I think the ability to have strong problem solvers in your team that can be applied to any obstacle that they come up with during the day, whether it's trying to resolve something with a colleague versus a strategy that they're trying to write or a brief that they're trying to finesse to get right for an agency. That ability to think and question and work well with others is really important in today's workplace.
You mentioned before about research and the role of research in putting together business cases. Do you research every business case you put together? And what's been your relationship to brand tracking and sort of knowing that you're on the right track?
So historically, we haven't had a huge research budget to do really in-depth Q&As or things that you might expect from a big company like a Kimberly-Clark, for example. It'd almost become your Bible. But I think there's been so much disruption in this space with providers that offer really affordable and fast dips, for want of a better word. So rather than going from 2 to 3 brand tracking, surveys a year that take 4 to 6 weeks to receive, you can get real-time responses with a number of platforms. So whether that's consumer panels that you develop yourself, with the support of an external provider, or monthly tracking now that's monitored in line with what you're doing from a media perspective. That, I think, is just absolutely, it's taken a while to catch up, probably when you think about the strength in innovation and influencer and the always-on activity. Finally now, there's providers that you can see in real time did that work. Otherwise, by the time you get the results, the moment's passed, and maybe that worked when we were all just doing big TV buys, but it really wasn't giving, I guess, the insight that was needed. And to answer your question, we don't research absolutely everything that we launch. There's a hybrid around, and there always is, around intuition, instinct, market data, and then, yes, working with these sorts of providers to get an insight on appeal and purchase intent. But because we are so fast-paced, a lot of our ability, I'm talking locally, of course there's a huge amount of research that goes on globally around the major innovation, but talking about what I'm specifically responsible for, it really is a mix of that fast, agile, fail fast, and if it's not working, divest and try something new.
I believe you're going into brand planning soon. What are some of the things that you think about? How do you structure it? What's important to you to get out of your brand planning sessions?
It's clarity. So it's being able to ask anyone in my team what their top 3 priorities are for the year and why. And there's so much work that has to go on behind the scenes for someone to be able to tell me that. So yes, do all the working, and I think there's a tendency, everyone of course wants to show all of their work, but ultimately we're presenting this to our sales teams, to our commercial teams, and what do you want them to take away? What are the tools that they'll be able to leverage to drive the brand forward in the next 12 months?
If you had a year to focus on one brand problem or something you'd love to implement, what would that be?
I think it would be having the luxury to work purely on a brand equity piece for the Revlon brand, outside of all the commercial NPD launches, business rhythms, but being granted, endless budget to think about, how do we really reinvent this brand for a much younger consumer?
What kind of activations are you most proud of? I was reading up about the Luna Park makeover that you did. I'm assuming you're responsible for that. Tell me about some of the activations that you've either been across or involved in.
Oh, hey, I should have put that as one of my memorable ones. That's probably number 3. Again, this is about making an impact and being surprising. Again, trying to make your dollars work harder and those fame building initiatives. And again, the value of working with amazing agency partners that bring these creative ideas to us. And then we go, hey, it's not right for that, but what about for this? And that was all around International Lipstick Day. So really wanting to own that moment in the calendar, find something that was outside of a product launch, but was about celebrating the #1 lipstick in the country, which Revlon is. And what better way to get some notoriety? If you can't decorate the Harbour Bridge, give old or young Luna a makeover. So that was a light show to fantastic music where there were 5 different shades and her look would change and it would rotate. And that was all part of a PR stunt, I guess, for getting some awareness of International Lipstick Day. And again, we've continued that purpose-led campaign through of that $2 donation mechanic going to the charity Look Good, Feel Better, which Revlon's had an association with for over 30 years. And we continue to build that platform each year. We've just finished our International Lipstick Day campaign for 25. And whilst we didn't give Luna a makeover this year, we were able to feature the stories of some incredible women on how that Look Good, Feel Better charity has supported them and tell their story so that people actually know what this charity does. And we featured them as our models on the campaign to drive those lipstick sales.
Are we becoming more fickle as consumers? If I think back to, my mum's generation and older, they had their shade of lipstick, they wear it multiple times a day, consistently reapplying it, diehard fans of the brand they buy. I don't know any of my friends that are that loyal to a lipstick. Are we becoming more fickle, or is it just that now we're open to more SKUs, from brands that we love?
I think a bit of both. There is so much more choice, and format innovation is huge. So liquid lip gloss, lip oil, gloss balm, lipstick, gloss stick. So there's not just this one format anymore. So suddenly it's opened up so much choice. And I think as well, society's changed. So we're less about the full face every day. We're not in those stereotypical 1950s world where we're putting on our really long wear foundation and lipstick every day. So whilst there's a place for that, there's also a place for this, efficient, quick look, glam, and whatever that is for the consumer. But I do think you're right. I think with more brands as well and more retail distribution, new stores, new models, it's really opened itself up to not needing to be loyal. And I think the joy of beauty as well is wanting to try new. And NPD drives sales. It's a bit like wine. People want to try. So you've got to work with that dynamic. You can't change that. You just want to be seen as the one that's also got the new as well as the staples.
What do you think that small brands could learn from Revlon?
I think to take the risk, whether that's trying something that's small scale and that can grow. So whether that is thinking about launching that product that you've not been too sure about because you're worried it's not going to be a success, but being okay with a little bit of failure, or come out with an idea that feels right, but it feels a bit scary because it hasn't been done or it's a bit outside the traditional shackles. But I think to your point around less loyalty, more choice, it's harder and harder for brands to stand out. So whether you're big or small, I think that mentality applies.
What excites you most about where the beauty industry is heading?
I think it's opened up enormously. Even in the 10 years I've been working in beauty. And thank goodness. I think inclusivity and defining what beauty is to you and making it accessible for every day is something that I'm really passionate about. It's not about having this one size fits all. It's not about defined standards of beauty. It's really about how it makes you feel and how you want to present yourself to the world and have fun with it.
Outside of Revlon, who do you think does brand building really well? Who are you loving?
I'm often attracted to Australian brands, and I don't know if that's because I just love being able to do local things with this big global brand, but I think it's about understanding the psyche of an Australian consumer. And often the brands that I'm attracted to have the ability to do that. So whether it's Telstra or Bonds, being able to they feature a lot of talent actually from all around the country from different walks of life. They surprise consumers. They're mass brands as well. Yes, they probably have a slightly broader demographic than Revlon alone, but there are some commonalities around thinking about those inclusive standards and how they're working with influencers and talent in their campaigns. And I think as well, the Shift 20 initiative I absolutely loved, which is for the ad campaign of the year last year, because you saw brands like Amy and ANZ having that playful twist on their iconic advertising campaign for the now. So being able to reinvent them for the society that we're living in now and making sure that there's really strong representation of people from all walks of life. And yes, whether that's disability or not the cookie cutter stereotype that you'd expect to see in a beauty campaign, I think that's something which we're seeing much more, from the world. And I think it's only a positive thing.
What kind of brand building work do you wish more companies invested in?
How they can make positive change. I think we all get very focused on the commercial goals and sales targets that we have to hit, and understandably, that's our core role within the organisation. But I think if you step back for a minute and think about purpose and everything that you're doing, what that says about the brand, brand is ultimately about values. And if people feel more positive about your brand because you're doing the right thing, not only does it make, the world a better place to live, but you do see, amazing positive intent from your employees right through to your consumers.
Do you think that doing good is good for business all the time?
By all the time, I would say no, because by all the time, I would take that to mean you say yes to absolutely everything. Every request you're asked for, partnering for, with any charity, but ultimately there's got to be grounded in purpose and there's got to be a reason for the partnership, just like any other. So unless there's a real synergy between the two organisations, and that goes for purposely campaigns or even just aligning yourself with another contra brand for a promotion, there's got to be real synergy for it to be effective. Otherwise, I actually think it lacks credibility, authenticity, and people are a bit surprised about, well, what relevance does that have to Revlon, as an example?
What's ahead for you in your career?
At the moment, I'm really enjoying the challenge of this leadership position and driving the business forward and having more of a holistic view across, both markets, running the P&L and growing team capability. For me, I'm really trying to think about, where else I can longer term, take these skills and continue to build and grow and work on other brands or businesses which have these values at their core, which really has been innovation and creativity.
Amazing. It has been such a delight chatting to you. Thank you so much for your time and can't wait to see what you're going to achieve.
Thanks so much for having me, Lindsay.
One of my key takeaways that I had no idea before meeting Amy was the interrelationship between global and local markets and how Amy and her team put together business cases for localized content with local ambassadors moving at the speed of change rather than waiting on global assets. I think it's just a great reminder that localizing global content and parameters for a brand is as important as the products itself.